mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 4, Episode 3 of HBO's Westworld, entitled Années, Folles. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to start by reading what Années, Folles is, and I looked up the pronunciation, so just so I didn't mess it up here, but I'm going to read what that is, and I'm going to read the episode description, and then we're going to go from there. So, the Années, Folles stands for the crazy years in French. It was the decade of the 1920s in France. It was coined to describe the rich social, artistic, and cultural collaborations of the period. The same period is also referred to as the Roaring Twenties of the Jazz Age in the United States. And in Germany, it is sometimes referred to as the Golden Twenties because of the economic boom that followed World War I. So that's straight from Wikipedia, that definition. I think that is pretty obvious that it ties into the new world that we see in the 1920s. It's called temperance, by the way. I don't know if they say it in the episode, but they talk about it in the post show, which, side note, I recommend you guys all watch. It really helps you gain a better understanding of the episode. And they also do it in the captions. When they have the knockoff version of Maeve that's in the, what's it called, the Butterfly Club, they caption her in the closed captions as Temperance Maeve. So Temperance is the name of the park. I think obviously the title is referring to that, the crazy years, which is almost kind of like a double entendre because these are crazy years that are happening within the show, within the confines of the show, but also referring to that age of the 20s, which I think is pretty clear that Temperance is based upon. And then the episode description says you can never go back again, but if you do, bring a shovel. I think that's also a clear reference to the shovel situation with Bernard and Stubbs. Bernard has Stubbs bring this shovel, and we don't see the shovel used, but the last time we see Bernard and Stubbs in the episode, Bernard is telling this group of people who I'm going to talk about a little bit later that he can help them find what they're looking for, which is a weapon that's buried in the desert. We don't know what the weapon is meant to be used for, but apparently the shovel is to help dig it up. That's what I'm assuming. So a little bit about this episode. I enjoyed this episode. I think that this season is off to a very strong start. They seem to have found a good balance between being mysterious and providing information. Whereas I think the last season and season 2 to a degree were more interested in being convoluted and not able to find that balance between being convoluted and providing answers. Like I said, the show seemed to get its rocks off on making sure it kept you as in the dark as possible via being confusing on purpose for the sake of, rather than just being mysterious. And I feel like this season feels a lot more mysterious than the others, as opposed to convoluted. And I think they've done a good job of striking that balance, and it's helping keep me invested. So I'm enjoying this season. I enjoyed this episode. I think they're doing a great job. It feels very similar to season 1 as opposed in how it makes me feel, as opposed to structure. So I'm going to talk about this episode by going, I don't want to say character by character because we really only spend our time in 2 places, but I'm going to talk about what the events that happen with the parties that we see in this episode, and give a few thoughts at the end. So I'm going to start with Bernard. This is the first episode where we see Bernard. We didn't see him in the first 2. He seems to have introduced what looks to be an entirely new storyline, as if we need that, since we're still trying to wrap our heads around where we are chronologically with the other stories, or where we even are physically in location in the other stories. And now we have Bernard coming in here with what seems to be an entirely new story, but I do think there's a connection, and I'll get to that toward the end of my little portion here about Bernard. But we open with seeing Bernard in the Sublime. He runs into Akichita, who we remember from being one of the Native Americans in the park in season 1. And Akichita tells Bernard that essentially everyone else who's in the Sublime has kind of made their own world that they live in that fits them and suits them. Feels very Minecraft, very Minecrafty. And I think it's interesting how interesting and eerie, how this show seems to be very closely tied to real life. Like, generally the first 3 seasons felt like, oh, this is what could happen way in the future. But now we're seeing this like in like an Oculus or in these VR worlds where you can create your own world that you can live in, and stuff like Ready Player One, like all that seems a lot more feasible right now. And I think it's eerie when something that's feels like it's supposed to be set far enough into the future where it's like this dystopian future where it's like, oh, that's possible, but that's way down the road scary, to that's possible and that can happen in my lifetime scary. It's kind of like how The Handmaid's Tale seems to kind of mirror real life a little bit more closely now than it did when it first premiered. And I think that's interesting. I wonder if they're doing that on purpose, kind of like making the show a little bit closer to where technology is right now, so that this dystopian future feels a lot less futury than it does generally when you watch sci-fi. But Akecheta tells Bernard that after a certain point, all of the potential timelines or worlds end in destruction. He also tells him that one year here in our world is a millennia there. And he explains time and all this stuff with this paper. And essentially, Bernard has spent his time in the Sublime for this indeterminate amount of years. We don't know yet how long he's been in there. He uses that time to view essentially all worlds that have happened and all potential worlds that could happen. And he also apparently learns that in all those timelines he dies. Akecheta tells him that, well, there's one where you don't, and that's the one where you stay here in the Sublime. And he's like, nope, I gotta go save those fleshy humans. And even though we don't deserve it, Bernard decides that he's gonna come save us, and he wakes up. He wakes up where we left him in season 3. He's covered in dust. Apparently Stubbs has supposedly been watching him, but he doesn't look like it. He didn't even have the common decency to dust him off. But Stubbs has been watching him, and like I said, he's seen all of these potential worlds. There's a potential possibilities, I should say. He's seen them all. We get a glimpse of that. We get several glimpses of that, but we get our first glimpse when Stubbs makes some crude joke or whatever about Bernard waking up. And Bernard's like, oh, that helps me narrow it down, because normally you make a joke about me not giving you a postcard or something like that. So now that Bernard knows all of the possibilities, as events unfold, he can kind of narrow down which potential world he's in. And he says that with he can influence what happens. You know, if I make some changes here and make some influences to what happens, we can end up saving the world, essentially. It's very similar to Infinity War, how Doctor Strange saw 14 billion or whatever possibilities of how they could end the fight with Thanos, and then one they live. That's kind of what's going on with Bernard here, which of course interests me because I love Infinity War. But Bernard, they go. I keep saying that I keep in my mind saying they go out to eat, which makes it sound like they go on a date. But they go to this diner, and Bernard does a couple more of his little magical future predicting tricks, and he spots a couple of guys and he follows them out. And I thought this was interesting because Stubbs, again, is supposed to be watching this guy. He didn't have the decency to dust him off. And then he lets Bernard just walk off after being like really weird, predicting what was going to happen and just seeming off. He even says something like, this is like the weirdest version of you. He just lets Bernard just walk off. Weird. Bernard walks off. He kills these two guys. We don't see it, but he scalps them and takes out their brain spheres, their in hopes. I forget what they're called, but he takes them out, throws them in a bag, which we only find that out later. And he throws them in the trunk of the car that him and Stubbs were in, and they go stand out in the parking lot. And Stubbs is like, well, this is the key to saving the world. I was just loitering. And he's like, nope, she is. And a woman rolls up in this truck and picks them up. He essentially tells this woman after she takes them to her kind of like, I guess, hideout, essentially he tells these people that he could help them find what they're in the desert looking for, which is this weapon. So I want to talk about the woman. So the woman, again, like I said at the top of the video, you should be watching these post breakdown shows that happen after the credits. So you get the credits, you get the next week on preview, and they have like this post show. They break down the events of the episode, and you can learn a lot from that. And in that breakdown, so generally they'll have, like, say if they have Tandaway Newton, right? And she's talking about, oh, Westworld, this happened, blah, 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 blah. They'll have, like, on the screen, it'll be like, Tandaway Newton, Maeve, like in quotes underneath it. So you know this is the actress that plays Maeve. When they showed the woman who picked up Bernard and Stubbs, it just said C, like the letter C. And so they're being cautious with telling us her name. And I think that's because C is probably Frankie, who is Caleb's daughter, grown up. The reason I say that is just because, well, one, they look alike, but two, we have seen so far this season Frankie kind of like training to become this kind of person. You know, we see Caleb teaching her how to shoot. There's a scene in this episode with this whole Carver guy where she's like, you know, I've been working toward this. I can help. I've been training. So like the idea that Frankie would grow up to be something like this rebel, it seems like, or this leader of this faction, it tracks, especially given what we see happens to Caleb at the end of the episode. So I figured that, you know, maybe C just stands for Caleb, and that's how they put her in the script to kind of just like not tell everyone directly who she is. But that's what I'm thinking. She's probably a grown-up version of Frankie, which is interesting because how far in the future does that now put this Bernard Stubbs storyline? Because we're looking at like, what does she look, 7, 8 years old, Frankie? And then C looks to be like 25-ish. So like you throw 17 years on to how long Bernard's been gone. What is this world like now? What is this weapon? What is it meant to do? So lots of questions that need to be answered in this new Bernard storyline, but ultimately I expected to tie in via C as Frankie. That'll tie us into Caleb and Maeve and whatnot. So that's my guess. We'll see how that plays out. Moving on to Caleb and Maeve, they tour Temperance, like I said at the top. That's the name of the park that they're in. They mention it in the post show, and the closed captions say Temperance Maeve or whatever whenever they're referring to these knockoffs that we see here. And essentially Temperance mirrors Westworld in every way other than updated or altered for that time period. So this is the 1920s. I'll give you an example that they talk about in the post show. When they get off the train in Westworld, we get accustomed to the guy that bumps into Teddy. We see there's a blacksmith there, and they're hammering away whatever metal. You got the sparks flying. In this, you still have the person who bumps into, in this case, Caleb, but rather than a blacksmith, it's like a car repair shop, and they're welding or whatever, and you got the sparks flying. So like it mirrors that. We see the Temperance version of Hector and Armistice. The same storylines, the same narratives are playing out. The whole safe stealing, all of that. Everything's playing out exactly the same here as it is in Westworld, just with different hosts that play the characters, slightly different names, and that's pretty much it. And the visuals are fit in with whatever the world is. It's interesting to me. So they introduce this, they mentioned the name Hecky Armon, which makes me think like, okay, that's obviously meant to be their Hector. Is it going to be the same actor? It wasn't. But you see a lot of Maeve kind of like throwing shade on the various aspects of Temperance. Like, oh, this is a shitty version of what we do in Westworld. But I feel like you only think that because it's not your version. Your version is going to seem the most authentic and the best to you. But in reality, shouldn't Temperance be better than Westworld? Because it shouldn't have any of the flaws of Westworld. It should be like maybe not a perfect version, but an improved upon version. I would like to think that Delos would have learned from whatever mistakes or flaws or just things that just aren't good enough in Westworld and could tweak those and make them better in Temperance. So like it feels like Maeve is really just hating, and it's not really like these are the Temperance Maeve and Hecky and fake Armistice. I don't necessarily think that they're inferior versions of the characters we know. She's just hating because that's just how we are. Naturally, the things that we associate ourselves with and that we remember the most are the things that we're going to value the most. You see it in like sports analysis, film analysis, music analysis. Whatever era you grew up in is always the one that you think is the best. So like that doesn't necessarily make it the best. It's just how it feels to you because that's what you're accustomed to, what you grew up in. I feel like that's what's happening with Maeve. So let's see. So after the safe stealing thing, they kill everyone in there, and Maeve and Caleb sneak out with the dead bodies to get themselves underground and into the behind the scenes aspect of the park. They run into the immediate lower level. They run into is playing out the massacre that happened at Westworld in the same area, and they have like this knockoff Dolores, a knockoff Teddy, and a knockoff, I can't remember who the other person was, but was it May? No, I can't remember, whatever. But they have these knockoff versions of them doing the same thing we saw in the Westworld Massacre. Then another level down, we essentially confirm what I was saying about the flies. You know, I said in episode 1, like, are the flies able to control humans? We get that confirmation. We see these like Prometheus looking guys, and they're making, well, we've seen them before, but they're essentially putting this parasite into this black goo They feed this black goo to the flies consume that, and then when the flies enter our bodies, we are now given the parasite, and presumably can be controlled via these sounds that are emitting from the tower. Now, we've seen in episodes 1 and 2 in Christina's world that there's a couple of hosts that can hear these sounds. They say the birds can hear them. But presumably that is how they control the people who have been infected with the flies. We see them kind of testing this out. We see that deputy assistant guy that Clementine gave shit to. They're like stacking blocks, and then they complete that task, and then they kill themselves. So it seems like the tower instructs them, like, pick up the blocks and stack them, you know, whatever. And you could see them kind of moving as if they don't have control over their bodies. Like, there's one you could see kind of like pick up a gun. He picks it up kind of weird, and he's like trying to cock it, and it's like, it looks very unnatural. And I think that's because they're not in control of their bodies. The tower slash flies or slash goo is in control of their bodies. So it doesn't feel very natural. And they're testing, I think, these people with this fly thing. And what a question that I've had is, how do you make the determination between whether or not you swap somebody out with a host version of themselves, like they did with that senator, or if you infect them with the flies? And what I think is happening is, again, 2 different time periods. I think what we see with Caleb and Maeve in this episode, we're seeing the flies being tested on hosts. Like, okay, we have this idea where we want to have flies infect humans, but let's start out trying it on hosts. And they're doing that. The tower's controlling the flies. They perform the task of the stacking the blocks, and they kill themselves, and that's that. I think in episode 1, I think it was, when we see Hale, it might have been 2, Hale capture the senator's wife, Anastasia, and she's kind of like, oh, I could use you for like a test or some shit like that. And then we later see her, she's like disemboweling these horses, and then Maeve shoots her, and we see the black goo come out. It makes me wonder if Anastasia was the first human test for the flies. And the cold open in episode 1, where we see that cartel guy get infected, is far enough into the future where they've already kind of mastered the fly technology. Where it's like, because he was very confident, like, you can give it to me, you can sell it to me now, or you can give it to me for free tomorrow. He knew the flies were going to work. So it makes me think that that's far enough into the future that they've already perfected the fly technology. And what we see in this episode is them kind of still testing it out on hosts. And then that other episode, Anastasia was probably like the first human test. So Caleb gets duped by this host version of Frankie that he sees on the monitors after he sees that deputy assistant guy blow his head off. He goes in there. He ultimately ends up saving this quote-unquote Frankie. We find out this Frankie is actually a host, and she infects Caleb with the flies. And then and that's the last time we see Caleb. And then we also see Maeve get into it with the Man in Black. And I think we also learn that there are multiple Man in Black copies, because she shoots him like 3 or 4 times, runs in a certain direction, and then kind of gets cut off by another version of him that appears to not have the bullet wounds. So I think they might have made multiple Man in Black copies, or he's an upgraded version, just like the senator and his wife that we saw in whatever episode that was. How they didn't respond to the freeze all motor functions, how they fought better, how he was able to eat the bullets. So maybe the Man in Black is an upgraded version of how we are accustomed to seeing the host, or there's more than one. Either way, shooting him wasn't enough to get the job done, and she ends up catching him. So, he ends up catching her. All right, so where did I leave off at? So I talked about my timeline idea with Caleb and Maeve and the testing of the flies versus the successful use of the flies that we see in the cold open in episode 1. So that's really all I had, I think, for that portion of the show, that portion of the episode. So what's the end game here? If the end game is to be able to control humans via the flies and via the tower, then what? Like, what do you do at that point? So, wondering what that's about, but I still think there's more to figure out between swapping out hosts and utilizing flies. What fly controlled humans are meant to be doing. Like, what is Hale's end game with that? It's got to be tied to the Man in Black buying up all that land. So lots to wonder about. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple of thoughts. Maeve has cock-blocked Caleb twice now. Is that meant to mean something? When they first arrived at the park and the one hostess was kind of like flirting with Caleb, she's like, your service is not going to be needed here. And she shuts it down. Then Caleb gets flirted with, who was it that flirted with him in this? Oh, just some random chick flirting with him at the butterfly club, and she shuts that down too. And I wonder why that is. Just maybe it could just be like, I just want him to be able to focus and not be thinking about his dick. I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. But I don't. It just seems weird that she shut that down purposefully multiple times now. I wonder if that's meant to mean something. Also, how would C/Frankie get back to her base if she was by herself? Like, do they always got to leave in threes? Because like she needed Bernard and Stubbs to lift those levers up to block those lasers. Like, what is like you must always have to leave 3 deep, or else you just can't come back. Or you could just maybe just drive around the things, but whatever. And then is it me, or does the Caleb's wife / Frankie's mom, Uwade, is it me, or is her accent very part-time, like a Walmart employee? Like it's not there all the time. It's not a full-time accent. It's a 25 hours a week accent. I don't know about that one. It just doesn't seem like her accent's all the way there. But those are my questions I wanted to pose. So let me know what you think in the comments regarding my thoughts on Bernard and C, whether or not that's actually Frankie, and if that's how we're going to connect these two timelines, and what do you think about Caleb and Maeve and the Flies and controlling humans, what their plan might be, all that good stuff. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Enjoy this episode. I think this season's been really strong so far. It looks like it's probably going to be in line with season 1. The way it's going, I'm enjoying how much we're learning each episode, how much is remaining mysterious. I feel like the drip feed of information is moving at an adequate rate. So let me know what you guys think. I'm enjoying the season so far, and I'll see you guys next week for episode 4. Peace.